Welcome to ZoomInData. Hello everyone. Thank you for joining Azure Logic Apps series. In this session, titled Logic Apps in Multi-Cloud and Hybrid Environments, Azure Arc and Beyond, we will cover how to run and manage Logic Apps outside of pure Azure, on-premises, other clouds, Kubernetes, Azure Arc-enabled Logic Apps, what it is, how it works, and when to use it. Hybrid connectivity patterns, cross-cloud event routing, and governance across environments. Step-by-step deployment demo plus best practices for security, monitoring, and performance, 2026 edition. This topic is critical for enterprises that are not 100% in Azure, or that need to keep sensitive workloads on premises while orchestrating in the cloud. If you find this content valuable, please subscribe to ZoomInData and enable notifications to stay updated. Let us begin. What is Azure Arc and how does it extend Logic Apps to hybrid, multi-cloud environments? Azure Arc is Microsoft's hybrid, multi-cloud management platform. It lets you manage resources outside Azure, on-premises, AWS, GCP, Kubernetes, as if they were native Azure resources. Arc-enabled Logic Apps, standard model, allows you to deploy and run Logic Apps on your own infrastructure, VMs, Kubernetes clusters, while using Azure Portal, CLI, and APIS for management. Benefits: consistent tooling, governance, monitoring, and billing, even for workloads that must stay on premises for compliance or latency reasons. What are the main use cases for running Logic Apps in hybrid or multi-cloud setups? Compliance, data residency. Sensitive data cannot leave on premises or specific country, finance, healthcare, government. Latency, real-time processing must happen close to on-premises systems, manufacturing shop floor, retail POS. Existing investments, leverage current Kubernetes clusters or VMs instead of full cloud migration. Multi-cloud strategy, orchestrate across Azure plus AWS, GCP using consistent Logic Apps model. What Logic Apps hosting model supports Azure Arc? Only the standard, single-tenant, model supports Arc-enabled deployment. Consumption model is Azure only, multi-tenant serverless. Standard on Arc runs on customer-managed Kubernetes, AKS, EKS, GKE, on-prem K8s, or VMs. What are the prerequisites for deploying Logic Apps with Azure Arc? Azure Arc-enabled Kubernetes cluster, or Arc-enabled servers, VMs. Azure subscription with Logic Apps standard plan permissions. Azure Arc agents installed on cluster, Helm chart or script. Network connectivity from Arc agents to Azure control plane, outbound HTTPS. How do you deploy a standard Logic app to an Arc-enabled Kubernetes cluster? Onboard Kubernetes cluster to Azure Arc. Azure Portal right pointing arrow, Azure Arc right pointing arrow, Kubernetes clusters right pointing arrow, add. Install Logic Apps extension on cluster, Helm install Logic Apps extension. Create standard Logic app resource in Azure right pointing arrow, choose custom location, Arc-enabled cluster. Deploy workflow project, VS Code right pointing arrow, GitHub Actions or AZ CLI, to the Arc location. Test run locally on cluster right pointing arrow, monitor from Azure Portal. How does monitoring and management work when Logic Apps runs on Arc? Azure Portal shows the Logic app as usual. Run history, designer, metrics. Logs, metrics routed to Azure Monitor, log analytics, same as cloud-hosted. Application insights enabled for end-to-end tracing. Cluster-level monitoring, Prometheus plus Grafana, for underlying K8's health. How do you handle hybrid connectivity when Logic Apps runs on-premises via Arc? On-premises data gateway still used for legacy systems, SQL, SAP, file shares. Arc agents require outbound HTTPS to Azure, port 443, no inbound ports needed. Use private endpoints or ExpressRoute for secure control plane communication. For cloud to on-prem, Logic Apps calls gateway. Gateway accesses local resources. What security considerations apply to Arc-enabled Logic Apps? Managed identities still work. Identity lives in Azure AD. Tokens obtained via Arc agent. Use Azure RBAC plus Kubernetes RBAC for fine-grained access. Encrypt secrets with Azure Key Vault. Access via managed identity. Apply network policies on K8s to restrict pod egress. How do you manage custom connectors in Arc-enabled deployments? Custom connectors are Azure resources, defined centrally in Azure. Connections can be created per environment, dev, test, prod. Runtime calls go through Arc agent. Outbound to external APIs. No change in designer experience. Same as cloud-hosted standard. How do you handle cross-cloud event routing with Arc-enabled Logic Apps? Publish events to Azure Event Grid custom topic from AWS, GCP, on-prem. Logic Apps, Arc-hosted, subscribes to Event Grid topic via Cloud Control Plane. Arc agent pulls events securely. Executes workflow locally. Alternative. Use Kafka or RabbitMQ bridge. Arc agent consumes locally. What are the licensing and cost implications of Arc-enabled Logic Apps? You pay Azure Logic Apps standard capacity pricing, vCPU, memory, same as cloud-hosted. No extra charge for Arc itself, free management plane. You pay for your own Kubernetes cluster, VM infrastructure. Connector calls still metered as usual. How do you test and debug Logic Apps running on Arc? Develop locally in VS Code, same as cloud standard. Deploy to Arc test cluster. Debug remotely via VS Code attach. Run history and logs visible in Azure Portal, proxied through Arc. Use kubectl logs for low-level pod troubleshooting. What are common challenges and solutions in Arc-enabled deployments? Challenge: network connectivity to Azure Control Plane. Solution: ensure outbound 443 Open Plus proxy support. Challenge: performance overhead. Solution: size K8's nodes appropriately. Use premium tier. Challenge: version mismatch. Solution: keep Arc agents and Logic Apps extension updated. How do you govern Arc-enabled Logic Apps across hybrid, multi-cloud? Use Azure Policy to enforce tagging, regions, security baselines. Azure Arc Governance Center. Apply policies to clusters across clouds. Central Log Analytics Workspace for unified monitoring. Role-based access via Azure RBAC plus K8's RBAC. Describe a real-world hybrid use case with Arc-enabled Logic Apps. Manufacturing plant. Logic Apps runs on local Kubernetes cluster, Arc-enabled. Triggers on local PLC events, via gateway, processes. Calls Azure OpenAI for predictive maintenance. Sensitive data stays on premises. Only aggregated insights sent to cloud power by. How does Arc-enabled Logic Apps compare to Azure functions on Arc? Both support hybrid, multi-cloud via Arc-enabled Kubernetes. Logic Apps, Visual Designer, Connectors, Orchestration Focus. Functions, Code First, Compute-heavy tasks, Durable orchestration. Often used together, Logic Apps orchestrates. Calls Arc-hosted functions for local compute. What are the latest enhancements for hybrid Logic Apps, as of 2026? Improved Arc agent performance and auto-update. Better support for private link to Azure Control Plane. Native integration with Azure API Center for hybrid MCP server publishing. Why is hybrid, multi-cloud knowledge valuable in interviews? Many enterprises are hybrid or multi-cloud. Interviewers ask, how would you run Logic Apps on premises? Tests understanding of Arc, governance, connectivity, and cost trade-offs. Shows strategic thinking beyond pure Azure deployments. What final recommendation would you give for hybrid, multi-cloud Logic Apps? Start with Azure hosted standard. Migrate to Arc only when compliance, latency forces it. Use managed identities and private endpoints end-to-end. Centralize monitoring and policy in Azure. Don't fragment governance. Test failover and connectivity thoroughly before production. Thank you for watching this detailed session on running Azure Logic Apps in multi-cloud and hybrid environments with Azure Arc. If you found this video helpful, please like, share, and subscribe to ZoomInData. More advanced Azure Logic Apps content is coming soon. Stay connected and keep learning. See you in the next video.